Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Public Safety Committee meeting. This afternoon we have one item on the agenda, and it's the expedited bill 3420, the Police Disciplinary Procedures, Police Labor Relations Duty to Bargain with amendments. And what I do plan on having happen today, and if the committee, the Public Safety Committee has concerns about this, they're certainly not going to be shy and let me know, but it's my intention not to have a vote on this. It's my intention to have the discussion on it today, and then see where that brings us for on the legislation. As we begin, I'm going to ask if any of the committee members, which consist of President Hucker and Vice President Albornoz, and we're also being joined by Councilmember Rice, who's one of the lead sponsors of this legislation. If any of them have any opening comments, and with that, do any of the committee members have an opening comment? Councilman Vice President Albornoz.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. First, let me just express my appreciation for that approach. I know that there will be some significant amendments to the bill as adjusted based on what occurred in Annapolis this most recent session. And obviously a lot that we have to sort through and unpack as part of those amendments. But I requested to speak up front because I just wanted to share some thoughts and reflections and context, at least from the direction from which I'm going to be viewing this particular bill and this discussion overall. I do want to begin by very much acknowledging and thanking Council Members Rice and Reamer for the introduction to this bill, as well as the co-sponsors, because it follows in line with the authentic and sincere approach that the Council has tried to take in ensuring accountability and ensuring transparency and ensuring that we meet this moment in time as we, as a country, address the systemic issues over generations that have led to a lot of the disparities in police work that we've seen in our communities of color.
Excuse me, Council Member, can I interrupt, please? I've just been told that they are not seeing this meeting, I guess, on TV. Can someone please check that?
I was on a roll, Sydney.
I'm sorry, and I don't mean that I went into the world to hear everything you had to say.
You're doing great.
Yeah, I'm going to hit the rewind button in a little bit. So apologies to everybody, because I'm going to try to repeat what I just said.
That's fine, and I want you to. It's my understanding, Fed is being shown, but it's labeled as public safety. So if Sky or someone can please change that or fix that.
Yes, I have an update.
This is, I believe.
Yes, Council President Hucker.
Oh, no, I hope everybody's patient today, because I believe this is the first day we've tried to stream two meetings at the same time.
Yes, that's correct. And the update I have is that we are streaming the Planning, Housing, and Economic Development Committee on county cable. This meeting will appear on YouTube and Facebook.
All right, everyone, could you please repeat that one more time, Council President?
All I was adding, Mr. Chairman, is just that I was urging everyone to be patient, because in my understanding of our staff technological limitations, this is the first day in a year and a half when we've attempted to stream two meetings at the same time on multiple platforms simultaneously.
And I think what is added to the confusion is that they mislabeled what's on television as public safety, and it is the Fed meeting. And of course, so at any rate, for those who are just tuning in, we are not going to take a vote on this today, and that could be another reason that we don't. But and with that, I'm going to turn back to Vice President Albornoz with my apology for interrupting, and please start over for your statement, please.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so I'm just going to repeat everything that I just said. I apologize, but I want to make sure the context is there. The first is just appreciating you, Mr. Chairman, for the approach that you're taking for this particular discussion. As was noted, this bill has been significantly amended because obviously there has been a change in policy at the state level, which will supersede a lot of the intent of the original bill. And so I want to express my appreciation to the bill's co-sponsors and co-leads, Council Members Rice and Reamer, and the co-sponsors of the bill for continuing what has been this council's attempt to ensure transparency, to ensure continuity, to try and build on the trust that is so necessary between law enforcement and our community to be able to effectively provide public safety across all of our communities. And we've all been working diligently to try and meet this moment. And I have greatly appreciated the thoughtful due diligence and research that went into the development of this bill, because again, it falls in line with many of the bills that my colleagues have tried to enact to ensure that accountability. Having said that, the other lens from which I am going to be viewing this is based on experiences I've had over the last several months in many conversations with our first responders, having visited both our 3D and 4D police districts, having gone on a ride along, and having also just a lot of historical background and context and relationships that I know my colleagues as well have formed over years with current police leadership, but also members of the rank and file. And we know that this profession is a difficult job on a good day, and that in this gray area of us trying to meet this moment, of us trying to enact legislation to right the wrongs of generations of the past, we also have to be open and have our eyes wide open to the impacts of some of the congruent policies that we have enacted with the best of intentions and that I have supported and co-led in some instances. We are seeing a significant issue with recruitment and retention across the entire force. We are seeing a diminishing number of dedicated men and women applying for these jobs. We are seeing smaller classes than we've seen in many years. In many of the conversations I've had with officers, we've talked about this within the context of low morale. What I saw in many instances borderlined on depression. And I've also had many conversations with the family members of our first responders who they themselves are experiencing trauma in very significant ways, to the point where many of the children of our first responders are reluctant to tell their friends what their mom and dads do. And we're arriving at a dangerous place, because while we are trying to enact policies and legislation to ensure that transparency, to ensure that we meet this moment in time and correct the generations of really just ineffective police work that led to disproportionate outcomes in communities of color, we also have to be practical about the impacts of today on our officers right now, that it's not just a blimp in the road, that this is not just a moment in time, that this is something that all police departments are facing across the country. But my concern is that we are seeing good police officers leave our department, and we're seeing fewer apply. And so the future Chief Joneses, the future Deputy Chief Yamadas, the future Chief Franks and Willies of our future generations, I'm worried right now about where we are. So as we thoughtfully deliberate over this bill, and I know Councilmember Rice and I have had many conversations about this, and he shares many of my perspectives and views in trying to do our best to have a balanced approach that takes all of that into account. If we can find a sweet spot that ensures accountability, but that also does not entirely do away with the system that has absolutely needed improvement, but has also led to some pretty positive outcomes over many years here in Montgomery County, we've got to do our best to try and find it. So will it appease everyone? No, it will not. Will it be perfect? Of course it will not. But I just wanted to provide that context in my decision and thought process as we go through this discussion, in honoring the sacrifices of the current men and women of our police department who help keep our places of worship safe, who help keep our children safe, who help address violent crime, but also the crimes that impact quality of life and disproportionately impact communities of color. So that was sort of long-winded, Mr. Chairman, but I just felt compelled to share some of those thoughts because this is a complicated issue. We can't pretend that it isn't. And it doesn't have easy solutions, but I know my colleagues are committed to doing our best to try and find them to meet this moment. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, for facilitating this discussion. I look forward to it. I will ask many questions, as I'm sure my colleagues will as well. And I've grown to really appreciate the council's process in my 3 short years on this council, and more often than not have been extraordinarily proud of the ultimate product we've ended up with. And I hope and suspect that's what we'll end up with here. So with that, I yield back to you.
Thank you. And you know, the expression was well said, and it was certainly worth hearing twice, or parts of it hearing twice. With that, President Hucker, did you have any opening statements?
I wouldn't call it a statement, Mr. Chairman, but thank you for asking. I agree with, I think probably nearly all of what the Council Vice President has mentioned. I certainly appreciate the intention of this bill and the thought that went into it. You know, it was drafted quite a while ago, and a lot has changed in the last year and a half. We're certainly all, I know all of us on this call and everybody watching are for police accountability, and there's many different elements and approaches to getting there. This council has been very assertive at passing with our partners in the reform community and in our law enforcement community a number of bills to improve our police accountability. I think we're very much headed in the right direction. At the same time, I think the Council Vice President is right about the imminent challenges facing us in both recruitment and retention that we've discussed during the budget season and before and after that. It came up today in the media availability that we held in light of the increasing rate of crime in Montgomery County and elsewhere all across the country and in the region. And you know, while we're all for police accountability, I think we can walk and chew gum. I think we can have that and have you know, vigorous community partners and community trust at the same time. I think this bill, you know, like I said, was written quite a while ago and needs quite an update. It was certainly written at a time before the Police Accountability Act passed through Annapolis. And I served in Annapolis during a number of previous unsuccessful attempts to pass statewide police accountability legislation. I'm really grateful to our state legislators for passing the Police Accountability Act this year. And I'm eager to see how that will be implemented and to watch it put in place over the next couple of years. So anyway, in light of that, you know, I just wanted to recognize that this bill was written from an earlier era, pre-Police Accountability Act, and we'll need to have some discussion of what's relevant and what's been preempted by the state. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Rice, did you have a opening thought? I can't say statement for President Hucker, so I'm saying thought. Did you have an opening thought from?
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I'm going to actually start off with our most recent meeting that you and I had together this past weekend.
Yep.
And I really want to thank you for your leadership in chairing this committee, but also in being a part of that discussion, because I think it was quite telling. In that discussion, we heard from community members about what they wanted to see and have. But I want to make sure that folks understand that this meeting was organized by an organization called Police and Community Together. It's what we all want. We all want police and community together. I am not a person who believes in defunding the police. Never, ever have I said that. Never, ever will I. I don't believe that that's appropriate. And I know that there are some people in our community who do believe that. I'm not one of those. I believe that policing in our community should support and make sure that everyone feels protected. Everyone feels as though their lives are valued. Everyone feels as though they're respected. And those kinds of things take hard work. And sometimes, unfortunately, it takes understanding that some people just aren't right for the position. And that's very true, and that's hard. And right now, unfortunately, what's being portrayed in the media is that all police are police that are ones that should be replaced, and that no one out there on the force is doing a great job in respecting community and doing what they need to protect and serve. That couldn't be farther from the truth. And I've said that multiple times, so I'll say it again today. So I want to make sure that folks understand where this is coming from, is that I actually want the lives of my police officers who are actually out there on the force, dedicating their lives each and every day to us, are the ones who should be held up. And unfortunately, they're being held hostage by those few that are actually doing things that are not akin to protecting and serving our community. And just as they exist in every other section of government and all kinds of private sector, they're members of our community. And so they exist in everything. They exist in elected office. They exist in Ride-On. They exist in Walmart. They exist in McDonald's. They exist in wherever. They exist in Marriott. Wherever it is, they exist. That's the reality of this. However, there is a marked difference. Our police officers are actually afforded with some rights that those other folks are not. And so we have to be very careful about that. And that's why the public is watching very closely what it is that we're doing. And they're so concerned because rightfully so, there are very few people in our community who actually have the legal right to kill a person. And that's something that should not be taken lightly. I know we don't on this, but I think that, again, oftentimes we say, well, our police officers need to be treated just like everyone else. Well, yes, to a certain extent. However, they are afforded rights and responsibilities that are much larger than other folks. Then we have to support them too. And I couldn't agree more with what Councilmember Alberno said. This is a very difficult time. I have a cousin on the force in Prince George's who continues to protect and serve those residents there. And I think about his safety and whether or not he's going to come home to take care of his two girls each and every night he goes out. But the reality is this, is that at the same time, I would not want my cousin to be out there disrespecting people, to be violating policies and laws, and think that somehow that's okay and that's going to benefit our community. And so there is a balance. There is certainly a balance that's there between finding out how we need to continue to support our officers and make sure that at the same time we hold those who are flying in the face of the law and policy accountable. And there's nothing wrong with that, because pretty much in every single other workforce out there, that's what's done. And so I don't see why this would be any different for our police officers. Now, I certainly understand, look, it's a hard time to sign up for policing, but some of the rhetoric that's out there in terms of, legislatures being anti-police, well, keep in mind, we represent the public. And when the public says that they want something to happen, we as legislators need to be responsive to that. Now, there are times, and we have to make sure that we're weighing how far we need to go. We have other concerns that are out there as well. We have to be concerned about other kinds of issues. And so we balance that as legislators. But let's just be clear. This isn't coming from some sort of legislative agenda that's anti-police. This is the community saying that we need to make sure that we have change. And we've heard that from folks. But again, I think that this council, this committee will do a great job in finding what Councilmember Alberno said is that sweet spot. I think that what you heard from Council President Hucker in terms of understanding that we are not in the same place we were when this bill was introduced is something I completely agree with and think needs to change. There are some points that have been brought up by the FOP that I think we need to consider as a part of this as well. That's what legislation is all about. But let's just make sure that we're starting from the same base point. Let's not make sure we're starting from a rhetoric of this being anti-union, anti-police, whatever the case may be. This is pro-public and police coming together. We've got to figure out how to make that happen. That's incredibly important for us, because if not, all of us will lose. Every single one of us will lose, because the more distrust that our community has in policing, we all suffer. You will continue to not have recruits come into policing if community does not trust police. It's not going to just be whether or not this bill is passed or how this bill is passed. If the community does not believe that they can trust the police. Doesn't matter what we do in the legislature, that ain't going to change. So we have work to do. We have work to do to show and lead by example that we can continue to make sure that we remain one of the best forces in this nation, let alone in this region. Yes, that's what I said, remain. And we can do that by ensuring that we continue to answer the call for reforms that make sense, make our police department one of the best that it can be, and make sure that you have people who believe in coming on board to a system that shines in the light of so many of the failures across this country of how policing is done, is something that is uniquely Montgomery County. So with that, I turn it back to you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your indulgence.
Thank you. And as Councilmember Rice mentioned, he and I were on a panel on Saturday. Seems like it was a little longer ago than that. Some events have happened since, but we were on a panel Saturday with the organization that police and community together. And I pointed out then and about in Montgomery County, and this isn't talking about the state law yet, but in Montgomery County, we've already passed 4 different pieces of legislation. 119, which was the officers involved death, the independent investigation. We also called it the LET Act, the Law Enforcement Trust and Transparency Act, which really is going to be taken over. That part is going to be taken over as of October 1st in 2 weeks or whatever by the state of Maryland. But we passed that, several months before the state of Maryland takes place. We had Bill 1419, which is the Policing Advisory Commission that was established. Bill 3319, which was the community policing, and it established minimum community policing guidelines. Bill 2720, which was the use of force policy and established minimum standards for police use of force policy. And of course, we're discussing this one today, and HB 670, the state law that'll be taking over and at various times when it takes effect, that's going to happen. There is much happening in the policing arena, and we need to make certain, as everyone has mentioned, that what we're doing is logical, and what we're doing is fair, and what we're doing is also protecting the people who protect us. And that doesn't mean that we, and I see Councilmember Rice shaking his head in agreement, that does not mean that we are going to allow anyone to do anything that they shouldn't be doing. But we also should be treating people fairly. And part of this bill is called Disciplinary Procedures and Police Labor Relations. The disciplinary procedures pretty much have been taken over by the state law. So that needs to change right away. I mean, we need to make certain that we follow the state law, and we need to make certain that we can follow the state law when it becomes state law, because as I always tell people, I know this is going to come as a shock, but we live in a bureaucracy, and it takes us a while to figure out what we need to be doing and to get things on the ground running. But we will be doing that. We need to make certain that we are going to be doing that when the times are appropriate. But the police labor relations, we need to make certain that the partners, the employees, and we have several unions on this call with us today, that the employees are treated fairly, just like we want to be treated ourselves, and our family members and our neighbors should be treated. And that is why we need to be extremely careful. And we've received information letters from the county executive. We need to be extremely careful on what we do and how we do it. We need to remind the people who are doing the work, who are actually in the field, literally saving our lives, that they are appreciated and that they will be treated fairly. So with all of that, and unless someone else has an opening statement, I'm going to go through this packet. And Mr. Drummer is here as well, who had the pleasure of writing this packet. I know that was not easy either, and we thank him for his work. But unless someone else has information in the very beginning. You certainly are welcome to join in the conversation as we go through it, but unless someone has any information in the beginning, I'm going to begin the packet. Does anybody have an opening thought? No. Okay. Well, with that, if we're going to start on page 2 of the packet, the issues have been outlined by Mr. Drummer, and they're 1 through 8. And it talks about in the first issue is the effective date of the enactment of HB 670, the Maryland Police Accountability Act of 2021, and the Police Discipline and Law Enforcement Programs and Procedures on Bill 3420. And there is, in that conversation, it talks about the various times when the state law will take effect and what it means. And Mr. Drummer, did you want to clarify any of that for us as we go through?
Sure. Thank you. As was pointed out already, the bill was drafted before the state law was enacted. The bill, as it's drafted, would change the current disciplinary system, which is under the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights, which provides for a traditional hearing board and permits collective bargaining to provide for an alternate hearing board. I'm not going to go into detail of the differences between them because what's happened, well, I will if you want me to, but the HB 670, which was enacted in the last General Assembly session, will preempt the county's ability to, not just of this county, but all the counties in the state, to have any role in creating a different disciplinary system than what's created under the state law. It doesn't mean the county doesn't have a role, but it's going to be preempted. The bill actually takes effect July 1, 2022, which is going to be here before we know it. But it has a provision in there that has a grandfather clause that preserves the existing collective bargaining agreement until the existing agreement expires, which for us is June 30th of 2023. So essentially, we've got less than 2 years where the council still has the authority to change the disciplinary process. And that's what this bill would do. I know, in having spoken to the original co-sponsors of the bill, that they're of a mind to take that part of the bill out of the bill and just allow the state law to go into effect. I do think I can explain how the state law is going to work, but we don't know all the details because there's a lot of details yet to be determined by the council. But the state law is going to create, it requires each county to create a police accountability board. And that's going to be citizen-led. And then the police accountability board appoints, the county also creates a, what do they call it? Administrative charging committee, which for the county would be for all the county police and all the municipal police departments in the county, not just the county police. And the administrative charging committee would also be civilian led. It's going to include the chair of the police advisory commission, or committee, I guess it's called police advisory committee, which I just mentioned, or another member designated by the chair, and 2 civilian members selected by the PAC, and then 2 civilian members selected by the executive. And it's the charging committee that's actually going to decide whether discipline should be administered against the police officer. And then you've got the Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission, which is required. I know they haven't done it yet, but they will be establishing a disciplinary matrix, creating penalty guidelines for different offenses. And if the charging committee determines discipline is appropriate, the chief is going to be required to offer discipline per the matrix to the office as recommended by the charging committee, or potentially higher recommended discipline still within the matrix. If the police officer doesn't accept the discipline offered, then we get to a trial board, which will be a 3-member board, which will actually hold an adjudicatory hearing on the disciplinary action, chaired by an active or retired administrative law judge or retired district court or circuit court judge, a civilian, again, selected by the PAC. So the PAC has got a lot of authority here, and a police officer of equal rank to the officer being charged. The trial board hearing is open to the public, and the trial board decision is the final administrative decision appealable to the circuit court on the record, whether there's substantial evidence. The county will not be able to change that system. That's the system we're going to have. The council will be responsible for enacting legislation to create the police advisory committee and the administrative charging committee. But that's the system we're going to have as of July 1, 2023, unless the General Assembly during the session starting in January changes it again. They may make some minor changes, but I think they spent enough time on this that I wouldn't expect significant changes. So that's the system we're going to have. That's a good portion of this bill, essentially to be preempted in less than 2 years.
Mr. Fuller, if I could, one thing you said that I don't know that we're as clear on it as we should be. You said that also this includes the municipalities.
Right.
Montgomery County would not be doing the discipline for the municipalities. The municipalities would have to set up their own boards according to state law. Am I correct in that?
No, I don't think that's right. I think the county is going to create an administrative charging committee for all the local law enforcement agencies operating in the county, the exception of Park and Planning and WSSC, because they're bi-county agencies, technically state agencies, and they're going to go under the state-created administrative charging committee. But the administrative charging committee is going to be responsible for charging municipal police officers as well. Obviously, the chief of police in Montgomery County won't be responsible for administering discipline and the trial, but the way I read that law, it's one charging committee for the entire county.
I was not aware of that. I thought that each individual
No,
police department.
that's not the way the law is written. So
Okay, well, we will find out for sure.
I'm sure some municipalities will have some comments on that, but
I'm sure they will.
I'm sure they've already had some comments on
I'm sure
that,
they have.
I suspect, but that's the way I read the law.
All right, so is there any comment on this, what Mr. Drummer just went through on the issues page is really, the way I see it, is really issues 1, 2, and 3 that we just discussed. Is that correct with everyone? Or maybe even 1, 3, and 4, and for 4 as well. Does anybody have Paternal Order Police President? I got to get your title right here. Lee Holland. I see you have a comment. Please comment, please. And you're on mute. There you go.
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to point out that there's parts of 670 I actually think might come into effect before the end of the agreement. One is the committees being formed, as that's not in our collective bargaining agreement. Just the hearing boards are in our collective bargaining agreement. So I think that's something that should be researched as well, of what would take effect on July 1st of 2022.
So I thank you. And so to Mr. Drummer, I don't know, would you be the one researching it? Dr. Stoddard, would the county attorney be the one researching this? I mean, we need answer, we need to make certain that what we're doing is the way it's supposed to be done.
Well, I think we're all going to be looking at that. I know the police department's spent a lot of time and effort trying to figure out how to comply with the state law. And the executive has a committee looking at it, but I'm not sure that's right, but it might be. The law is pretty long and pretty confusing. But it looks like, at the very least, the trial boards won't work that way until July 1, 2023. And that's what this bill is about, not how you get to a trial board. That might be true. Certainly the council's going to have to enact a law to create the police, the PAC before July 1, 2023.
Thank you. I see Chief Parker Lone has raised his hand, and then also Chief Daryl Frank. So Chief Willie Parker Lone, if you could, you had your hand up first, just like in elementary school. You get to speak first. There you go.
Great, thank you. Just to avoid confusion, because I know Mr. Drummer said it a couple of times, we now have two things that are going to be called the PAC. So you have the Police Advisory Committee that the council came up with, and now you're going to have this Police Accountability Board. So just make sure so we don't have any confusion with citizens, that they really understand which one you're talking about and referring to.
Maybe we should change the name of one of them if it's state law that we can't change, and maybe we need to change ours. So, we're confusing. It's confusing to start with. We don't need extra confusion. Thank you, Chief Frank.
There, I found the unmute button. Thank you. President Holland's correct. There are some things as we implement and go towards this July 1, 2022 deadline and July 1, 2023, there are things that we're going to have to put in place as a county to get ready for that. So, and also one thing also that we're talking about internally is that this process will apply to police executives, sworn executives on July 1, 2022, which offers certainly an opportunity to set this up and start to get our feet wet with how this is going to go. There's a lot of things that are still up to the state. The schedule on from MPSTC, the schedule on punishments that we'll be looking at. We will be on the way sooner than we think. But I also agree that again, the last date for implementation for all officers is July 1, 2023. We can certainly implement sooner in collaboration with Lodge 35, again, as soon as July 1, 2022.
Have I lost you guys? Where are you?
I had to unmute.
Yeah.
So
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Wren.
yes, please keep in mind, we have two law enforcement agencies in the county. We have not only the police department, but we have the sheriff's department that falls under this as well. So as we do our research and as we do our coordination, that department has to be included in these discussions, as well as any agreements or mandates that are imposed.
Thank you. Vice President Albornoz, and you're on mute. There we go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually do have a question both for President Holland and both our assistant chiefs. When I went to my ride along, it's clear there's a lot of confusion within the force itself, because it, as has been noted, is work in progress in terms of how it's specifically going to be implemented. And I know there are a lot of moving parts with not just the state legislation, but enacting the county's legislation that we've passed this last year and a half as well. So if you guys could describe for me, how are we keeping our rank and file informed along the way Because obviously it is. Mr. Wren, if you could mute, sorry, we're hearing some background from you.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you. So obviously, to borrow what Council President Harker, we have to walk and chew gum at the same time, applying current policies and procedures as new ones are evolving and changing in real time. Could somebody describe for me a little bit what that process is looking like internally within the force now? Has there been a committee assigned? Are we, because people are hearing different things from different people and interpreting them differently. And everybody wants to do the right thing. So I just wanted a little bit more clarity on what that looks like within the rank and file and how we're communicating to them, what's confusing already to us.
Council Vice President, unless President Holland would like to speak first, I'll speak to a couple things. So I'm the co-chair on the Reimagining Public Safety Implementation Committee, along with Dr. Stoddard. And we are going through we have two processes in play. We have a lot of the work that needs to be done is by internal groups within the department. Honestly, right now, we're geared up to get implementation done by October 1st for the changes to the search warrant laws, the changes to the MPIA process as it pertains to IAD files, and a couple other initiatives that are coming up. We're well on the way. One of the things that we have found, which is problematic, and trying to bridge this gap, and especially as quick as this has come on between now and October 1st, is the state hasn't gotten us all the information that we need to actually tell our folks what this means. I'll give you an example. Just last week, we've got rough drafts on how officer-involved shootings are going to be investigated. Now, certainly this is, and this is no fault of the OAG's office and the new investigative unit they're standing up. They were given a tremendous task to take over something that we've done very, very well here in Montgomery County. So they are now getting their protocols, they're sending them out, and they're actually working with us to make sure they're not missing the details, because a lot goes into those things. So we now have drafts, but we still don't have finals. And I don't want to put out information because that gets even more confusing, I'm sure you know. So we have a couple of communications that will go out in the next 2 weeks regarding changes on October 1st. Those are the most important priority right now. Then we're going to transition, and when I say transition, again, understand I have two different things going on. We have our Reimagining Public Safety work group that involves multiple county agencies talking through these changes. We also have our internal work groups that are already working on things that need implemented in July of 2022. Every time we get closer to getting for sure information, correct data out to them, we're planning on putting it out. Unfortunately, right now, we're going to have to put out informational bulletins, and they're going to come very close to the October 1, 2021 deadline, just because there were so many unknowns. As we continue, what we're looking at is we have a front-facing dashboard, the county does, that shows our progress on these efforts, both the audit, the Reimagining Public Safety, and the Police Accountability Act, which we're going to be updating, and we need to do a better job of letting our officers know that information is there. Additionally, Chief Jones, as we get more information, is going to message the department, because we have to fill in those blanks. As you know from your time when going to 3D and 4D and going on your ride-alongs, which again I thank you very much for. As you know, there's a lot of information that's not out there because of the swiftness and suddenness of these law changes. And we owe it to our officers and our professional staff too, to get them the right information and the best information. A lot of the instances we're still waiting, as like for House Bill 670, we're waiting on a lot of information from the state. And I really can't, I don't have anything to give until we say, other than to say that there's peers of theirs, there's executives that are working very hard on it and want to get it out there as quick as possible.
Thank you. Mr. Holland, please.
Yes, thanks. I want to piggyback on that there is a lot of I don't want to call it confusion, but unknowns because things change so much, right? 2720 here, our use of force. Well, now there's a state use of force bill. So now officers are going to have to look at the state bill, Senate Bill 71, how that's implemented here. 670, we don't even know the impact of 670 yet. It's hard to get the information out, but we're passing so much here at locally and at the state, which are kind of piggybacking each other, is causing people to be unsure of what they can do, what can they not do. A lot of training bulletins going out, a lot of updating of directive and policies. And it's a lot on officers. I mean, officers out here trying to patrol the streets every day. At the same time, they're getting messages to check the training bulletins, do this and do that. So we're putting a lot on the plate of our officers right now. And that's one thing of why it's important for us to be in this process. That way the members can have their voices heard when we sit down with police management and saying, okay, how are we going to do things? And we can be there to be the voice for the rank and file.
And thank you for that. I'm gonna get to President Hooker in 2 seconds, but thank you for that. It's also very necessary that anything that we do is for the discipline side of this, that anything we do follows what the state is going to be doing or that we ultimately have to do. We should not cause any additional confusion. There's enough confusion. Thank you very much. We should not cause any additional confusion to change air law, in my opinion, to be anything different than what the state is going to be 3 years from now or whenever that date would take place, because all that does is cause angst. President Hucker.
Sorry, our excellent first responders are passing my house. I agree with you. We need to be aligned with state law. It takes years to pass most significant state law, like the 2 bills here we're talking about. I'm a little intrigued by both Chief Frank and President Holland saying that they're sort of struggling to know what's happening at the state level. We have a very professional intergovernmental relations office. Is anybody here from their office? I guess not. So their role is to inform our, among other things, especially post April, would be to inform our county government officials about the changes in state law and how to, conform our practices and policies to state law. That's exactly what they're doing. They don't have any hearings to attend or anything else like that in general from April on. So it's strange to me that I hope they're vigorously involved, and I hope it's an anomaly that they're not here informing us and answering your questions on what state law means for Montgomery County, because that's their role.
And I appreciate that. Chief Frank is going to speak, but the other part of that is if the state has told anybody what it is. And I don't know that they've been as clear to the state. Chief Frank, did you have a
sure? But we should just know. We should just know when that's being rolled out. Those information points are being decided and rolled out. I agree with you.
So,
Chief Frank, were you going to speak, please?
yes. So, Council President Hucker, thank you. We've been working with them a great deal. They're part of our committee, and I'll be quite honest with you. They're looking at some of this stuff because of the swiftness with which it was written and the lack of intent behind it, that some words in it are just placed in ways that they have to go back and seek clarification. So we are doing that. We have a very good working relationship, and our goal is, and what I think you'll see out of the next legislative session is you'll see some things get cleaned up a little bit better. But they are truly part of our work group.
And Dr. Stoddard, I saw your hand up, and I also saw Mr. Wren's hand up. Dr. Stoddard's going to speak next, and if Mr. Wren he's not on the screen right now, but he can speak right after that, please.
Yeah, I was going to echo a little bit what Assistant Chief Frank said, and said Ms. Boucher from IGR is sitting on our Reimagining Public Safety Implementation Committee. We meet every other week, as we do also have members from the council staff as well on that committee, Mr. Drummer and Ms. Farag as well. One of the big things, and I think a good example, as it was explained to me by Assistant Chief Frank, is you take the implementation of this officer-involved shooting investigation turnover that occurs October 1st. The devil's in the details of some of these, some of these activities. So, for example, the Maryland State Police is going to take over an investigation immediately. Well, what does that mean if it's raining outside? Do they take over immediately, as in you don't touch anything and the rain potentially disrupts evidence? Well, no, there's some flexibility there. And we got to be able to give guidance to our officers about what that actually means. That level of detail is just not embedded within the law. And there is actually some interpretation that has to occur by agencies outside of Montgomery County government, namely state police, the Office of the Attorney General, et cetera, that we wait for clarifications. We ask them more questions, then they have to further clarify. This is just as was alluded to, this is the rapidness with which we have to take some of these actions along these timelines, which is why we're focused on this October 1st timeline initially, but obviously we've got milestones next year and the year after and so on and so forth.
Thank you. Mr. Wren, did you have a comment?
Not at the moment.
Okay, I thought your hand was up.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
You were scratching your head. There you go. Okay. President Hocker.
Can I follow up on Dr. Stoddard? So which regulations are written and which ones are not?
So it's sort of the rough outline of some of them are written. Others, the details of some of them, when you actually go to implement them, are not nearly as clear and they need to be provided. And so Assistant Chief Frank can talk more closely about when things are provided and in what manner. But frankly, it's just a matter of as you go to implement, you start to think through more details than the legislature could possibly have conceived of when developing the law. And so now you're left just working out the exact details of, okay, well, what level of, for example, in the example I provided, what level of intervention are our investigators taking to protect and preserve evidence? And does that align exactly with what the state law had intended for these investigations, which are meant to be? So it's sort of the intersection between those two things. Another example, even within the example I provided, is if we're involved in a police chase, for example, and it results in a fatality, well, you could have people who are involved in that accident who are to be investigated by the Maryland State Police. You could have other folks who are injured or killed. God forbid, by that chase, who would be investigated by the county police. And so it's an example of the intersection of this law, the original intent, and the actual operational implementation that has to occur within the police department.
So, okay, remind us what that means for this bill then?
Well, we were talking about in the context of all the things that we have to implement for the public, the Police Accountability Act, and how it challenges sort of the nuance.
Okay. Are you finished, Mr. Hocker?
I think so. So yeah, anyway, go.
And Mr. Frank's hand was up, and then Mr. Drummer. So Chief Frank, are you?
Actually, with Council President Hucker's follow-up question, my point isn't relevant because he was asking about this particular bill.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Drummer.
I was just going to add that there's also the Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission has been given a lot of responsibility to create a disciplinary matrix. I believe they're supposed to revise some body camera standards, and I don't believe they've finished that. So it's kind of hard to tell people what's going to happen in the future, because it hasn't been done yet. There is a big role for that. I think the law also changed the composition of the Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission, and new members had to be appointed. And last I heard that hasn't been completed yet either.
Thank you. Vice President Albanese.
So I appreciate the Council President's summary statement about how this relates to this bill, but I think it's important and relevant to note that all of these things are connected. They are inextricably linked, and they have direct implications for our officers who are on the ground right now trying to sort through all of it while we sort through all of it. And so we're adding another potential bill here that is added on to all of the other bills that have occurred at the state and local level. And in this gray period of transition, we all need to be sensitive to and empathetic of what's happening practically right now on the ground, where we have incidences of crime going up, and us trying to enact current policies while trying to figure out the new ones that have been administered. So I don't think we can look at these in isolation any longer. I think it's more appropriate for us to look at them congruently. So, and the point was made, frankly, by just hearing the description of what's going on right now. So that was, I think, why it's relevant to this specific bill in this broader context of a discussion. But with that, I yield back to you, Mr. Chairman.
And I thank you. And that's why I read the various legislation that we have done in the county, some of which was already been taken or is going to be taken over by the state. It is necessary that this is a package that we are dealing with. And so I appreciate that as well. Anybody else on it? Now, the way I see this, if you look in our packet, we have the first issue was the effect of the enactment of HB 670. It's the second part was what is the current police disciplinary system in the county. The third part was do other jurisdictions use alternative hearing boards? And the fourth part was how will the new statewide police disciplinary system work under HB 670? And the fifth part was, should the committee amend the bill to delete the changes to the current disciplinary system in light of HB 670? And it's my understanding that the lead sponsors on this do want to change some of that. Do we want to go back through and discuss each part of this, or are we okay to go forward for the discussion about the changing, the amending this bill? Is anybody, are we okay with moving forward? If I don't hear anything, we're going to move forward.
Mr. Chairman, sorry, what do you mean by moving forward?
I mean, that we would go to Councilmember Rice, who is going to be suggesting an amendment for this for the disciplinary part.
Is there an amendment coming from members of the committee?
Not from the committee members. It's in our packet.
Right.
And that they're going to be giving an amendment or suggesting an amendment that to discuss. Unless you have an amendment, do you have an amendment?
I don't know. I think the bill needs to be rewritten, but anyway.
Yeah, well, I don't disagree with that part.
Right. I think amendments have to come from the committee is what I understood.
Well, that they're suggesting it to us that.
I see. I got you. Okay. Now I'm caught up. Thank you.
Vice President Alvarez, are you okay with this?
Am I okay with the amendment that's been proposed?
No.
Okay.
To have the next discussion be the amendment rather than work on.
Yeah, yes.
Okay. So with that, we're going to turn to Councilmember Rice, who he and Councilmember Reamer, I guess, have come up with the suggested amendment.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And let me just say that Council President Hucker, I hear you. There will need to be some significant redrafting of the remainder of this bill, even if disciplinary is removed. I am not one, not to speak for myself, I am not one that is looking and seeking to rush this through. So I think that, again, we need to talk about a number of the issues. That's why I was very happy to hear when I met with, when I talked with Council Chair Katz on Saturday, that this was just going to be a work session and not a voting session. I think that's appropriate. I think that it may warrant another work session or two to come up with what exactly needs to be a part of this legislation. I do think at some point we do need to talk through the salient points and make sure that we're in agreement about some of the things that we feel should be expected of our employees. And so from that perspective, you know, I'm jumping ahead to some of the next conversation, but did just want to say that I am not one who's looking to rush something like this forward. I mean, you always know, working in Annapolis, we can always amend a bill. You know, we stripped out an entire bill and replaced it with new language. So from that perspective, I don't think that we need to do that much, but there are some significant reworkings that need to be done to this, and I'm supportive of that. Like I had commented before, I read Mr. Holland's letter to the council president, so thank you. There are some things that were identified in there to where I do have some concerns about some of the issues regarding our police rights when it comes to some things that I don't feel as though necessarily need to be up to the police chief and understand his concerns there for the rank and file. So certainly there's space for negotiation there and conversations around what should and shouldn't be included. And I think that's a conversation that the Public Safety Committee needs to have. So with that being said, I would hope that we would amend Bill 3420 to delete the proposed changes to the current disciplinary system. Mr. Drummer has already done the due diligence of putting what that amended bill with deleting the changes to the disciplinary system would be on circle page 175 beginning. And so I would direct folks' attention to that, but would hope that the committee takes this up, as you heard from the council president and from council vice president. You know, I'm not a part of the committee, so I don't make recommendations, but would just hope that the committee does at least start with that to give us a good starting point for how to move forward with the rest of the pieces of the legislation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Have the committee members had a opportunity to look on circle 175 for the suggested amendment?
The amendment would just take out any changes to the current disciplinary system. So any changes that are made in the disciplinary system would, in this bill, would be gone. So it wouldn't make any changes. It wouldn't, it's not an attempt to, to create the police advise, the PAC, the new PAC. It's just taking out whatever changes were in the bill to the disciplinary proceedings and leaving it as is for now. That's what the amendment does.
Any comments from the committee members?
No, so it defaults to the state action, basically.
Yes. And to me, that is the right thing to be done on this disciplinary part of this. This is, we are creating a bigger problem for the people who are actually doing the work than we need to be doing. So I'm fine with the way Mr. Drummer just explained it, that we would be following the state law and not having or creating our own. But President Hucker, where are you?
I want to put a little thought into it, Mr. Chairman. I didn't think we were voting today.
We're not voting.
It seems a little bit of
the
a
question is whether
no, sure.
for them to come back.
I think I'd want to put a little thought into it.
Okay. All right. So we will hold that one back. I mean, we're not voting anyhow. My thought was whether or not our staff had to work on anything for discipline that would be different than the state law. And as far as I'm concerned, they do not to when they rewrite this legislation. Okay. So with that, and then we're going on to the number 6 on Mr. Drummer's packet, if I can find my packet now, which deals with the collective bargaining rights. And it said, should directive number 6 is should directives implementing an employer right be subject to collective bargaining. Is there a comment on that? No, I'm very concerned that, and I appreciate what Councilmember Rice said earlier, and I appreciate what Councilmember Rice said just as we're having these discussions, and that's why discussions are extremely important. But I am concerned that we are doing something to the employees who are police officers that we would not be doing for employees in other areas of work for Montgomery County. Now, I do keep in mind that there is a difference for a police officer and then in what they do and then what some other employees do. But I do believe that if possible, and to the greatest degree, we should be saying that collective bargaining is collective bargaining. Now, we have to be careful on what we're bargaining. And I think that President Holland has touched on that. There are certain things that we say that can be bargained, and certain things that can't. If the police chief and Mr. Holland, please correct me. It's always when I'm wrong. It's not if, because I will be wrong. But we bargain when, if the police chief says I'm short in Silver Spring Station this evening, somebody's going to have to go down there, that they have to go. But the question is, during other times, when if they can give them the proper notice, and how they give them proper notice, and those sorts of things. And I believe that we should be continuing to do that, because that's what we do with other employees as well, unless there's an emergency. If there's an emergency, I believe we have to take care of what we have to take care of right then. So that's where I am. Anybody else on discussion in general? Please, Council Vice President Albornoz.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would love to hear from Dr. Stoddard or Assistant Chief Frank or Parker Lone, because I know there was a comment that came over from the county executive and from the chief's perspective, and I would like to hear from President Holland's perspective on this as well, as I know you do too. I think it'd be helpful to have that context. I'll reserve the right to make comments after I hear from them, just to provide some context and background, because they're literally in the room as these negotiations happen. We are not. And so it would be better to understand from their perspectives, their reaction and thoughts to the proposed bill. Okay,
well, Dr. Stoddard had his hand up first. So Dr. Stoddard.
Yeah, I would say in talking to the county executive about this, his position is that the supposition that bargaining with the union, any union, results in a more difficult implementation as a sort of default position. He doesn't agree with that position, obviously. And I think that we've had some very productive conversations with the FOP and our other employee groups on how to implement things. And I think they provide an example of the body-worn camera implementation, where they actually requested a broader implementation of body-worn camera than the chief himself was proposing for utilization. And so I think there are many examples that could be provided that illustrate the value of engagement with the FOP particularly, but generally with the employee groups, on how they make effective policy corrections that the chief or the senior executives within the police department or even the county executive's office could always see. They're the officers who are on the ground. They're at the front-facing levels of our implementation of all these policies, and in many cases, being precluded from bargaining with them or working with them on these policies would just result in a bit worse policy. And so I think it's just a supposition that we generally think that there's a productive conversation to be had with the unions on the implementation of things that are going to directly affect them and their work at the ground level. And we just don't. The county executive doesn't believe that we should be precluding that right.
Thank you, Mr. Holland. I have Mr. Holland, Chief Frank, and then Councilmember Rice. Mr. Holland, did you have a comment?
Sorry, you caught me off guard because I had my hand raised, but
well, I called you Mr. too, and I know that threw you off, but go ahead.
I think it's important to show that the examples used in this packet, except for one, are with an old police chief and old presidents of the FOP, and that we are trying to have a good work relationship here, and we've been able to work things out. When the police department has something they want to get done, we sit down and we get that to happen. For instance, the Microsoft Teams issue. It wasn't, the issue with that was we want to make sure our process was fair, and if one person got to use a Zoom platform, the other candidate should have the same ability to do that. So I made the phone calls to make sure that happened. So we try to work with this department administration the best that we can to get whatever needs to be done, get done. So that way the workers have their voice in it, and the department is able to move forward with their things. So if there's any other questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you. It's going to be Chief Frank, Councilmember Rice, and then Mr. Wren, and then Mr. Drummer. Go ahead, please, Mr. Frank. Chief Frank.
Thank you, sir. So a couple of things. I do want to reiterate Chief Jones, and he commented on this back in the original application when this came forward, and you know, all of his years of experience, he knows how this department operates. He knows how this county operates. He knows how important the relationship is with unions. Now, if he was given, you know, if someone deemed that he should have these responsibilities, he would be very wise and judicious in its use. It's what comes after, and who would come after him and what they would do with such responsibility, which kind of goes to what I do want to compliment President Holland for the working relationship we have now. I'll give you another example. We just, to better our efforts at Vision Zero, we went to a central traffic unit, really caused great upheaval for our great motor officers who were dispersed across the county. It was a tremendous change to how we do business. And we engaged multiple times, multiple meetings on getting that done, not only for the benefit of the citizens, but the benefit for the officers and the great impact it was going to have on their lives, their childcare, their schedules, where they report to work for. So we engaged in many meetings. And in fact, right at the end, as we were coming up on the deadline to implement it, there were a couple calls between me and Lee, working out things that we didn't even think of through all those meetings. And the relationship was collaborative and we got it done. We have a central traffic unit now. So I will say, being new to the chair, I've enjoyed my relationship with President Holland. We're getting things done. And I think we can continue to do that. The one area that Chief Jones did make a note on previously, the ability to transfer people for disciplinary reasons. He does believe in that. And I will say, and he has seen it, where employees that, you know, you have a police department that's full of very proud and dedicated public servants. And when someone does something to violate that trust, they have a hard time. And so the chief does believe that if someone in a specialized unit, again, a sustained complaint, a sustained violation that warrants transferring, he should have the ability to do that. But outside of that, he's going to remain silent on the rest of those. And certainly our relationship with President Holland and Lodge 35 is going along very well right now. And I'm very pleased with that.
And I'm going to turn, I know I gave my list, but I'm going to turn back to President Holland so that he can reply to what was just said, please.
Yeah, I'm glad the point was made about the sustained, because I was worried that it was transferring employees before they had right to due process. But I do want to say, in the past, we have worked out where officers have been sustained complaints, and it was the chief wanting to move them, and we have worked those out. So again, I still think that should be effort that's between myself or the next president and the police chief that's here on what's best and how can we make things happen, because it affects the person. They need to have their representatives talking to them so they better understand of what's going on, maybe why they should be moved, instead of just saying, hey, you're being moved here. Having a group effort on that makes those decisions pretty much a whole lot easier for the person that's affected. So thank you.
Thank you. It's going to be Councilmember Rice, then Mr. Wren, then Mr. Drummer, then Vice President Albornoz. Councilmember Rice.
So thank you, Mr. Chair. And so one of the things that Mr. Holland just said that I want to make sure, we didn't mention the public in any of those comments. And that's really important. Again, we talked about the public trust, when we talked about people's belief and faith in the system. If they don't believe as though there's a process that's there that ensures that a person is being held accountable, then we suffer as a result, and we have the same challenges that we currently face. And so while a lot of people would like to just say, look, I'm leaving it in the hands of the folks who are there, who are to work it out and negotiate it, that doesn't give any sort of solace to those individuals who may have been aggrieved by that particular officer in that case. And so we've got to remember that as well. There's a victim that's at the core of this also, and the feelings of them, their families, their friends, and the community will then spill over into the greater community. So we've got to be very cautious of that. Yes, we need to also be concerned about the officer and individual, but we also equally need to be concerned about the person who's been aggrieved in that situation. But let me just say this. It's interesting that we brought up some of the other ones, but I just have a question for you, AC Frank, when it comes to, something that's at the forefront right now, which is mental health and well-being. How many of our officers have mental health training right now? And is that something that you can mandate, or is that something that actually is bargainable?
No, that's not bargainable. We have the right to assign training. I want to say we have 860 some officers that have gone through our CIT training. And that's the 40-week block, in addition to the training they get in the academy, or any training that they get in, and I don't have that list in front of me, any training they get in service training.
Because that's different from the answer that Chief Jones gave on Saturday. Councilmember Katz was there and said that the reason why we're only at 70% of our folks is because it's actually bargainable, and he can't force folks to go through that additional mental health training. Councilmember Katz, is that not what you?
Yeah, I think, though there was several discussions on that topic on Saturday. He said that I believe that there's 100% of the officers have gone through what Chief Frank is just saying, but for the actual additional CIT training, there was, I think, 70%. I think that number was right. And that in some cases, the difference, the 30% were people that who are sworn officers that don't necessarily deal with the public directly, that they're in other positions.
But not all.
But there was some confusion on that one, to me.
Yeah, which is why I wanted to clarify, because that's another one that I think is incredibly important. And if we're, again, leaving that up to bargainable. So if folks could just get back to me, because I'm hearing conflicting information that's there, because the community asked the question. Didn't come from me, came from the community, because the community said, how many officers, and asked the question directly to the chief about how many officers are trained in this additional mental health training, understanding that tends to be a lot of what we have in terms of the challenges between the community and police in these unfortunate incidences. And so it was my assumption that all, but that's not the case from what the chief said. So if we could get to the bottom of that, because again, I really think that as delineated by Mr. Drummer in item 7 in the packet, there are specific subjects that I think would be exempted from collective bargaining. Do I think that dry cleaning? Do I think about Microsoft Teams? Absolutely not. So I hear you, Mr. Holland, in terms of where you are, and think that those aren't the ones that the community is concerned about. The community could care less whether a person's on Teams or Zoom, but they do care whether or not an officer is trained and highly trained, specifically in these instances to where we see, unfortunately, the most egregious of outcomes. And that is the death of individuals, right? And so you can't march at Phenon Bearhays. You can't talk about all these folks and then say that this isn't important, and we need to have, and we don't need to have our police trained in this respect, or that it needs to be bargainable. It needs to be something that's a standard. And so there are some things that I believe are outside of that. Again, they're very narrowly tailored. And so I think that, again, whether it's discipline and being able to transfer someone, look, if a person did something and they violated it, then it's up to the chief to decide where that person should go. That's in the best interest of the public. And so I do believe, as I heard from AC Frank, that there are a couple, there aren't a lot, but there are a couple that we should look at and say that, yes, in fact, these should be ones that standardized. We feel as though, we're going to err on the side of making sure that we're protecting the public. We understand that individuals have rights, and they certainly do under collective bargaining agreements, but there are some that go outside of that. And that's what the public expects. The public expects that if there are things that happen that are outside of that norm, that there's going to be something that happens as a result. That's what happens to them in their jobs. And so they would expect the same thing of the police officers that may have done something against them or their family members. And so from that perspective, that's just what my thought is there. I don't know if AC Frank, you wanted to respond to that. But I really want to get to the bottom of that. That's really, really an important one.
Sure, and I agree, and I will seek out Chief Jones and get some clarifications on his statement on Saturday. But I want to reassure this group, right now, every officer that goes through my academy, our academy, takes CIT at the end of it. They actually come back and take it. Now that's a change in how we did business before, but it's actually been a change for a couple of years. We recognize the need to have that training and how important it is. So they actually come back and do that 40-hour block of mental health training. I will find out from Chief Jones and I will get back to you, council member.
Yeah, I appreciate that because it was linked to the issue of tasers. And he was giving the story about how the issuance of tasers, and then they said, well, the only way that you can get a taser is if you actually go through this mental health.
And so right now we're in the process, actually, we've had discussions with the chief about what the future of taser issuance is going to look like, because our standard was, because of the taser and its use, our standard was you go through the 40 hours of CIT training before you get a taser issued either voluntarily or involuntarily. And one of the things we're looking at is some recommendations that are being made across the country on best practices is on whether or not they need that 40-hour training, because that's the funnel point, right? That's the choke point on getting more tasers out, is because our standard is so high, you have to go through this 40-hour training before you get the taser. That finding the experts to do all of that training and get all those people through to the other side where they actually get a taser, that's what we're trying to fix. So we're actually in discussion about that and where we want to go as a county police with how we issue them out.
Okay.
I know Mr. Holland wanted to reply, and then I have one more thing, Mr.
Okay,
Chair.
well, can we turn to President Holland to answer?
Please.
Yeah, please.
That's my rights. Thank you for your comments. First, I didn't have the community in the one before because community is going to have, out of House Bill 670, they're going to have their input now, especially for anything that they're aggrieved upon, because there's going to be a disciplinary chart, which may include transfers in it, and it may be the right of the board of what happens to that officer to include transfers. So this might even be out of the hands of the police chief after House Bill 670 over the disciplinary chart made by MPTC. As to CIT training, I'm in favor of all officers having CIT training. I've never seen a policy come across asking for officers to be CIT trained. There is one thing about tasers is we don't have enough tasers and we don't have enough people in CIT that if people aren't, then it goes by inverse seniority, then that's who you send. And I also want to point out that we're trying to work on another alternative rather than just tasers is pepper ball guns. That's one thing we're in conversation about now to give another idea of a less lethal option to be used. So these are things that the police union here in this county are trying to work with. But again, we value the community, and I believe communities can have a lot more input because of House Bill 670 to include transfers, because that could be the punishment for the officer is to be transferred out of their unit. It's to be seen because the disciplinary matrix can be made up by MPTC. But again, if we start getting into these things, the whole state could change everything. So thanks.
Okay.
Thank you.
Go ahead,
Mr. Chair,
Councilmember
we
Rice.
can turn to Mr. Wren. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Wren.
As a couple quick points. I think there has to be an understanding that, the House bill has pretty much cleared up the issue of trying to curtail bad behavior and enhance accountability. And that, I agree, Councilmember Rice is a critical component about repairing our relationship with the community. And I could tell you that what you may not know, President Holland, my union asked me, the AFL-CIO engaged in hours of discussions with key legislators, and we never, ever got in the way of the mandate for those two provisions. Just want to be clear about that because we support it. Folks have to appreciate the fact that the bill as currently written goes far beyond trying to maintain public trust and restore public trust. What you're now doing is you're intruding into the voice that workers have gained at the table through one, the passage of a ballot question many, many years ago, decades ago, to gain the right to collective bargaining, and then the wisdom of the respective councils that passed it for the FOP, for our union, for the firefighters. Those rights didn't just drop out of the sky. There was a lot of public discussion and public debate about whether Montgomery County was ready for that or not. And the voters overwhelmingly embraced the concept because they appreciated and understood the value of collaboration between the employer, the folks that run the county government, and their public servants. And I would submit to you that over the 42 years that I've engaged in labor relations with this particular employer, it has served both sides well. It has made us both better. Now, the public safety infrastructure is comprised of the police, both sworn and civilian, who I represent. It includes the sheriff's department, corrections, and bits and pieces of HHS that are embedded in the police department and in the judicial system. Now think about this a second. If this bill were passed as written, and this may not have been the intent of the authors, what you will do is establish two sets of rights. One component of the public safety infrastructure would suddenly have fewer rights than the very other members of the infrastructure that they have to depend on for their safety and for them to go out and perform the duties and responsibilities that not only the government expects them to perform, that our community relies on. Just step back a second and think about that. Can you possibly imagine the negative impact that would have on the morale of the sworn police officers in Montgomery County? Why would anybody want to stay, and why would anybody want to come here when they're being treated as second-class citizens when compared to the rest of their counterparts in the public safety infrastructure? This is very dangerous. This is a very dangerous precedent that we have to stay away from.
Mr. Chair, could I just respond very, very quickly and say that, Mr. Wren, I agree with you, which is why, again, I continue to use the language of narrowly tailored and delineating specific directives. You heard from AC Frank regarding what happens with discipline and transfer. And you've heard me bring up one with CIT training, and we'll get more information on whether that one is even necessary. There may be one, and again, I don't want to speak for my other co-sponsor. There may be 1-2 other issues that are out there, but there aren't many. And so from that perspective, I agree that the bill in its current draft, I mean, just as you heard, was drafted a long time ago. And, we've learned a lot since then. And so certainly I'm amenable and think that we need to have something that's in place that does specifically address the issues and concerns that you, as well as Mr. Holland, have addressed, but also that balances where AC Frank and the chief are, and the public is as well. And so from that perspective, I do believe that there is a balance. There is a balance to where, again, this is what people are asking for. If I wasn't fresh off of this, again, and this wasn't, let me be very clear, this was not an organization that was anti-police. This is an organization that believes in police. In fact, that supports school resource officers in our schools and believes that there's a role that they have to play. So this is an organization that's out there who really feels as though there should be a great way in which we can bring police in our community together. And it's through initiatives like this that give, again, the public additional confidence in that these things will be taken care of, and that there are repercussions that are there for people who violate policy or the law. And I understand and hear you that many of that should be addressed in 670. But I do think that at this point in time, with the level of concern and consternation that many people have in our community, especially in our communities of color, especially in our communities of lower socioeconomic status, that those are the ones who are asking for, while they still want police, let me be very clear, they also want the police to be held accountable in situations where they feel as though they are violating their rights or violating the law or policy. And so from that perspective, I do believe there is a balance. And it's not how this bill is currently drafted. That is not the balance. I do believe that it's something that gives us the ability to narrowly tailor this to specifics that would give our constituents confidence and more additional trust in our police and the government, who is deemed with trying to make sure that we keep them on track with doing the right things to protect and serve our community. And so from that perspective, I don't think we're that far off. I really don't. And would hope that the wisdom of this committee, taking into account what we've heard numerous times from folks in our community, as well as what we've heard from Mr. Holland and Mr. Wren, there is a middle ground. There is a place where we can land that I think represents us moving forward and us delivering to everyone, making sure that folks know that equally both sides are valued and we come up with a way to make this work. So I'll just leave it with that. And I thank you for your comments because I agree with all of them.
Thank you, Mr. Drummer. You have been very, very patient, as has Vice President Albornoz. Please, Mr. Drummer.
All right. Thank you. Well, this has been an interesting conversation. I'm glad to hear that the police chief and the FOP have got a better relationship and getting along better. I just wanted to clarify that the bill as drafted would not prevent the police chief from discussing any of the directives with the FOP. What it would change is the requirement that it can be held up by potential dispute over what the ultimate decision should be and end up going to binding arbitration in the impasse procedures. That's what it would change. It doesn't change the ability of the chief to discuss and talk about these things with the union. It just changes the requirement that you have to come to an agreement or submit it to arbitration, which has held up directives over the years for a long time. That's what the bill does. I just want that to be clarified. As far as what Councilmember Rice was talking about, I think I did mention in the packet that you could amend the bill to simply take certain specific issues, topics out of the impasse procedure and mandatory bargaining, rather than the general implementation of any employer right. That is a possibility too. I mean, that's an alternative. And that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Vice President Albornoz.
I want to explore that, exactly what Mr. Drummer just said, because I do think taking a scalpel here makes a little bit more sense to me. And for further context, so as you all know, for 12 years, I was a department head. And actually, Mr. Wren and I served together on the Labor Management Relations Advisory Committee. And so I really grew to respect and appreciate the process by which bargaining, and there's going to be disagreement. It's inherently in its nature. And sometimes there will be heated disagreement over issues as they arise. But it was my experience over the 12 years as a department head that it created a time and space for there to be open and honest dialogue that is followed through a process that in of itself helps alleviate and address some of the concerns. It provides an opportunity to vent in a way that's productive and efficient. It provides an opportunity to listen to each other in ways that are mostly productive and efficient, but again, sometimes a little heated. And I know that over the years, the relationship between the FOP and police management has ebbed and flowed. as it does in other departments. And obviously, it's unfair to entirely compare the relationship between the FOP and other departments because we're dealing with life or death. I mean, that's the obvious difference and one that we should never lose sight of because it's so important. But I also feel that we need to take into account something I said in my opening comments. The trust that we have to have with our community is unquestioned. And the steps we've taken through the Police Advisory Commission appointed by the council, through the Reimagining Police Task Force appointed by the county executive, through the new procedures at the level of the state, which will intentionally provide an opportunity at its most sensitive points for the public to be able to have a voice, especially as we discuss police discipline. You know, that is all pretty significant progress. And what I want to make sure happens here is that there aren't any potential expanded unintended consequences. And again, going back to something I said earlier, we keep talking about morale issues as though I want to underscore the direct impact of those morale issues that I witnessed and that we're all seeing out in the community among our rank and file and officers, and by extension, their families. And so there are a lot of moving parts right now. And I would like to, as we revisit this and come back, first of all, we need a clean version of the bill based on the many changes and adjustments that have had to have been made. And I do want to explore what Mr. Drummer just mentioned, which is that alternative approach. We've already done it. There's some precedents in some of the initial bills we enacted on police force, which through legislation we took out of the bargaining process. And so to codify what had already been a practice that the FOP was already had acknowledged during their testimony when discussing that bill. So I think there's another way of getting to our intended outcome here without exacerbating the already significant unintended consequences that are starting to arise with the other well-intentioned and thoughtful bills we've already enacted, especially as we go through this transition period. I also believe it would be wise for us to see the full implementation of those before, you know, we're enacting so many of these policies right now all at the same time. I'm just worried about their implementation. And so we have to be cautious and methodical in how we roll these out within reason. And so that's another thing that's in the back of my mind as we have these discussions and thoughts as well. So to summarize my rambling comments there, which I think were probably a little clumsy, I apologize. I also agree with a lot of what Mr. Wren was saying in terms of the precedents that this may unintentionally set and why that's a problem, both in the specific instance of relationships between the FOP and management, but more generally across the board. And if we can tease out and follow through on some alternatives, as Mr. Drummer was alluding to, I think we should explore those.
Thank you, President Hocker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree. We've spent an awful lot of time on this bill that has largely been preempted by state law, and we knew that going in. To me, I think bill obviously needs a lot of work, and it seems like everybody agrees on that. And the sponsor should go back and spend time with key stakeholders and bring us a bill that's sort of more current, given what's happened in Annapolis. To me, we have a lot of public safety challenges in front of it, and I'd want to spend committee time on addressing our rising crime rate, the largely abandonment, to me, it feels like, as local council member of downtown Silver Spring, the suspension of traffic enforcement, which was unauthorized, and we learned about in this committee, in a recent committee hearing, the morale issues that we've talked about, driven by low salaries and way too many vacancies and high attrition that we should try to address. We have a shooting in downtown Silver Spring last night that I still don't have any details on. The public doesn't have any details and is asking for details that, you know, haven't been communicated. To me, we have all kinds of public safety challenges in front of us, and those are immediate and acute and serious, and my phone blows up about them every hour of the day, and those are the ones we ought to be dealing with, not a bill with sort of theoretical impact that's not current given what's happened in Annapolis.
Thank you. I'm in agreement. Mr. Wren.
I just want to quickly respond to Mr. Drummer's statement. You know, what he's suggesting is to strip collective bargaining, the scope of bargaining rights with the strip normal mandatory subjects of bargaining out of collective bargaining rights that millions of employees across this nation have enjoyed for decades. I do not believe that is wise. Let me tell you why. Because if workers, whether they're organized or not, do not have a level playing field to deal with their issues, their concerns, their priorities, and how management decisions impact their lives and their families, then what you're going to be left with, and I was in Montgomery County when we had this type of environment, which led to all the unions seeking collective bargaining in the first place, is labor unrest. I don't say that as a threat. That's just human nature. And we carefully over the years crafted legislation and built relationships to avoid labor unrest. And we managed to maneuver through a worldwide pandemic, which our folks collectively held the line and kept this community safe. And how do you think we managed to do that? Because we were able to bring their fears, their frustrations, and their anxiety to the bargaining table. Earl was part of those conversations. They were emotional, they were heated, but we negotiated MOUs to maintain the confidence of our workforce. Folks, we cannot disrupt that. That's the only way we could meet the growing needs, which President Hucker just enumerated in public safety alone, and we have growing needs in HHS and everywhere else to take care of this community. And that's your alternative. Either folks have a voice at the table, or you substitute that voice with labor unrest. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President Hucker, your hand is still up. Did you mean for it to be?
I beg your pardon. Sorry.
Okay. And Mr. Wren is too. Chief Frank.
Yes, sir. I would be remiss. First of all, we have a lot of terrific officers and sheriffs out there that can't help themselves but want to do a good job for the residents of this county. Despite all the turmoil, they come to work every day and they are giving it their all. What I will tell, I'll miss my opportunity because Council President Hucker hit on it when he was talking about the rising crime rates, and then I've heard it a couple times about morale, but even important going with recruiting officers. I want to give you some perspective of where we are, and this is why I really appreciate the scalpel approach that you all are taking and going back and looking at this. The class that's in the academy right now, there's 21 officers. Well, we started with 21. We were able to find those candidates from 480 applications. So the next class, without even accounting all of the attrition, which has almost doubled since the late part of last year, we were authorized by budget 34 positions. Now we could fill many more than that because of attrition. I've only got 320 applications to date, and that starts in January. That's not going to get that filled. And what these young people are looking at, it's already mentioned, salary, right? They look at salary, they look at benefits, but they also look at the environment they're going to work in, what they're coming into. And when they see chaos, these young workers, and we're working with a great innovation committee that out of the CE's office to get us some ideas on how to attract more people. When they see chaos in a community, they don't want to come to that. So I appreciate that everything that I've heard from the group here about slowing things down and thinking through some things, because I want for our citizens, the ones, the shootings up north, the crime we have down in Silver Spring, as being the Silver Spring commander and working with Council President Hucker. I know it's near and dear to his heart. I want as many officers as we can get out on the street doing what we have a 100-year history of, excellent police work. So I just wanted to get that opportunity to kind of bring some perspective where we are in hiring and for future discussion.
And thank you, Chief. I early on when I first said we were going to have this discussion today at the Public Safety Committee, I felt that this is where we needed to have a discussion. There has been so much information and so much misinformation, and it's really not a healthy situation that we're in. And so I really believe that we needed to have a very transparent, very public conversation on this. And I believe that we are getting to the place where we need to be. And that is, and everybody keeps talking about that famous scalpel, but we need to have, if there needs to be some changes, we need to have it as narrow and for as whatever reason it has to be, but we should have a good, open discussion. And I was going to say frank, but I didn't want to confuse the chief. But we need to have a good, open discussion on it. And I turn to my friend and colleague, Councilmember Rice, who's certainly done a very good job today explaining where we are and why this legislation came to light, and how he and others have agreed that some of this is not close to being needed at this point. I think what you need and your co-lead, Councilmember Reamer, need to sit down and figure out what is and what isn't, and then we need a clean piece of legislation that we can then really have a discussion on what we agree on and what we don't. Because at this point, we don't know what we agree on and what we don't. And I do believe, if possible, you need to sit down with their labor partners and have a discussion with them as well to see if what they suggest and what they don't suggest. I mean, we've all talked about these heated discussions. I've been in a few of those myself. But at the end of the day, if people who are passionate on a topic, if they are passionate on a topic, there's a reason, and you need to hear why someone is disagreeing with you so much. That doesn't mean you agree at the end of it, but you need to hear it. So I think at this point, unless the committee disagrees with me, I think at this point we've had almost a discussion for close to 2 hours on this, and we need to then ask the lead sponsors to go back and have their thoughts and be complete with this discussion today. Is there any discussion other than that, Council Vice President Albornoz?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll only note, I've had some very, I'm sure I'm not the only one, but I've had some very compelling conversations with rank and file officers over the last few months, but in particular over the last few days. And I think we would all benefit, including the public, from hearing some of what I've heard, and I'm sure my colleagues have as well, regarding those morale issues, regarding what's happening within the force right now. So I'm not sure exactly what that looks like, but to the degree to which we can enter into the public record, some of the comments we're hearing from some of our officers, I think it would be helpful as we have this discussion. We've had many opportunities and continue to have many opportunities for the community to weigh in. And fortunately for all of us, they have not been shy about weighing in. But while I have tremendous respect for police management in the FOP, I think it would be helpful if we could hear from rank and file officers, either within the committee session format or as part of the packet moving forward.
And I'm fine with that. I have to tell you, what we have done, and policing is certainly one of the areas that we've done this, is whenever there is a horrible situation, I mean, there's all sorts of press coverage. There's all sorts of press releases. There's all sorts of discussions. There's all sorts of that the public sees the turmoil and should. I mean, I'm not suggesting that they shouldn't, but every day, and I'll bet you it's more than once a day, a police officer saves somebody's life. You know, that there's these successful stories where somebody saves another, risks their own life to save somebody else's life, and none of us ever hear that. None of us. And that's not fair. We need to absolutely send out a press release every time that happens, so that the public is aware that this is not a one-sided thing, that the public is aware that yes, there can be problems, and yes, there have been problems, but yes, there's days where there's far from problems and people have risked their life to save another. I go to the award ceremonies, as do many of my colleagues, and certainly those in the uniforms do that as well. And you hear of these stories where somebody had to run in and take a knife away or whatever and save a child and do all of these things. And the public is not aware of it. You know, it gets no publicity for it. So I believe, and as I agree with you, Vice President Albornoz, we need to hear from the rank and file. And I also believe we need to have the discussions when somebody is receiving these awards. That should come before the Public Safety Committee so the people are aware of that as well. Anyhow, that's where I am, unless there is any other discussion. Councilmember Rice's hand is up, please.
Well, thank you very much. And I've heard a lot today around centering on what we need to do. And I certainly will make sure that I reach out to Mr. Holland and Mr. Wren so that we can sit down and have a discussion around what it is that we're looking to try and accomplish here. But I will say this, let's keep in mind again that this is the community's voice, right? And we can't pretend as though that somehow miraculously morale is going to increase because people are all of a sudden tomorrow say, I believe in police, I love policing. That's not going to happen. It's going to only happen through continued work, through us working together to make sure we're telling the stories. I agree with you wholeheartedly about what it is that we need to do and that we show examples. I will just say this, and I'm probably going to get in trouble for it, but oh well. You know, when we have the Officer Morrises of the world, who basically ended up facing no, from the public's perspective, discipline for what he did when he pounded Mr. Pessoa's neck into the ground. Those are things that continue to be at the forefront as well. So yes, we are concerned about the morale of officers, but guess what? That should be placed on a person like Officer Morris, not on the community. The community hasn't done anything wrong. It's examples like that of bad policing that are the reason why the officers are experiencing what they're experiencing. So let's make sure that we redirect that energy, all of that frustration, all of that, you know, why is this happening? Other officers should be talking to him. Go call him up. Go pull up his email and say, why did you do this to us? Because that's what's happening. This didn't come out of anywhere. This didn't just come out of a person pulling this out of the sky. This came from examples that were on video of people not doing what they should be doing, violating procedure, violating people's rights. That's what this is coming from. And so the only way to fix that is to make sure the public knows that those kinds of things can't happen again. And when they do, folks aren't going to be out there interacting with the public anymore in that kind of capacity. That is important. That's an important message. And we've got to get to that. It's not just about having an officer coming in and talking about how bad his life is now because folks don't like police. That's important. But guess what? We've also got to make sure that we're also talking about the fact of how we've got officers who continue to violate policy, who stay in their jobs and continue to do what they do and make it hard for all of the hardworking men and women who put their lives on the line each and every day to save us. That is unfair to them. And so we owe it to them to make sure that we're doing all that we can. So I look forward to rolling up my sleeves, working with Mr. Holland, Mr. Wren, to try and get to that place.
Thank you very much. Unless there's anything else, we're going to adjourn. Yes, Councilman, very good. Thank you very much for being here. We are adjourned. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.